It was my 63rd birthday, and all I wanted was to enjoy a quiet meal with my family. But instead, I found myself standing on the cold doorstep of my own son's house, my fingers gripping the doorframe for dear life. My son, watching from the side, said nothing as his wife pushed me out into the night. The only answer I got was the deafening slam of the door, followed by the biting cold that cut through the hallway like a knife. I had never imagined that my birthday would turn out like this. My name is Linda, and I was once a dedicated mother and grandmother, the glue that held our family together. But today, I was standing outside, my heart breaking, feeling as though everything I had given over the years had meant nothing. The tension started earlier that evening, when I had prepared a special dish for myself, a creamy mushroom casserole. It was something I hadn't had in years, not since my daughter-in-law, Anna, had insisted she was allergic to mushrooms. The first time she mentioned it, I'd been understanding, even though I had always loved the dish. I made the sacrifice. Over the years, mushrooms had disappeared from our table, and I never questioned it. But this birthday, I couldn't help myself. I thought, maybe, just for once, I could indulge in something I loved. I'd made sure to prepare all of their favorite foods, 2 roast chicken for my son, Jack, and honey-glazed wings for my grandson, Danny. I thought it would be a small treat, just for me, a single dish tucked away in the corner of the table. I never expected that it would set everything in motion. As I set the casserole down, I felt a sense of relief. The table was full of the comfort foods I had prepared with love, but that relief was short-lived. The moment Anna walked in, she saw the dish. Her eyes narrowed, her lips curled, and before I could even offer an explanation, her voice exploded across the room. "What is this?" she demanded, her tone sharp and accusing. "Didn't I tell you I'm allergic to mushrooms?" I stood there, frozen. The years of sacrifice, of putting my family's needs before my own, felt like they meant nothing in that moment. Anna's face twisted in disgust as she continued her tirade. She pointed at the casserole, her voice colder than I had ever heard it. "Are you seriously testing me again?" she sneered. I had tried so hard to make everything perfect. I'd worked tirelessly to maintain peace in the family, to make sure everyone was happy. And yet, here I was, watching my own son, Jack, stand by without saying a word. He didn't even look at me. He just stood there, as if I was nothing more than an inconvenience to him. In that moment, I realized that no matter what I did, no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough for them. And just like that, the warmth I had felt in preparing this meal, in trying to make this day special, evaporated. I was no longer the mother or grandmother they respected. I was simply the woman who had overstayed her welcome. As Anna's anger flared, I looked at Jack, my son, my flesh and blood, hoping for some sign of support. But there was nothing. No words, no empathy, just silence. And then the door slammed shut behind me. I was left standing in the cold, my heart shattered, knowing that my own son had turned his back on me. That night, standing outside my son's house, I couldn't understand how things had gotten this bad. The door slammed behind me with finality, and I was left on the cold, unforgiving step, my body shivering and my heart aching. What had I done to deserve this treatment? All I had wanted was a quiet evening with my family, a simple celebration for my 63rd birthday. Instead, I found myself humiliated, cast aside by the very people I had given everything to. I thought back to the years of sacrifice, how I had raised my children with love, how I had always put their needs above my own. I had worked tirelessly to create a safe home for them, to make sure they had every opportunity. But what did I have to show for it? Not even the basic respect I had hoped for. My son, Jack, stood by silently, watching as his wife, Anna, dragged me out. It was as if I wasn't even his mother anymore. He didn't care. He never said a word. The whole situation began over something as small as a dish of creamy mushroom casserole, a dish I had made for myself. Over the years, I had learned to avoid mushrooms entirely after Anna told me she was allergic. At first, I had been understanding. I hadn't made a single mushroom dish in years, though it had once been a family favorite. But on my birthday, I couldn't help it. I wanted to enjoy something I loved, just a small dish, tucked away at the back of the table, so no one else would be bothered. I even made the other dishes they loved, roast chicken, honey-glazed wings, and more. I thought everything would be fine, but Anna found the casserole and everything fell apart. She immediately exploded in anger. "What is this?" she shouted, her voice sharp and accusing as she pointed at the casserole. "Didn't I tell you I'm allergic to mushrooms?" Her face was twisted in disgust, and she jabbed her finger toward the dish, as if it had done something wrong. She raged, saying I was deliberately trying to make her sick, that I was testing her. I stood frozen, not knowing how to respond. My stomach twisted with a deep sense of guilt, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. I was only trying to have a moment of happiness, a moment where I could enjoy something for myself. But it wasn't just the casserole. It was everything. My son, Jack, just stood there, watching the whole scene unfold with cold indifference. He didn't say a word in my defense. The silence was deafening. I had poured everything into raising him, and now, here I was, being treated as if I was nothing. The daughter-in-law I had tried to be understanding toward, the son I had supported through every stage of his life, they both seemed to have forgotten who I was, what I had done for them. I had made sacrifices my entire life, not only for my children, but for my family. I had given up my own dreams, my own happiness, to make sure they had everything they needed. And this was how they repaid me. I had tried so hard to keep the peace, to be the glue that held everything together. But now, standing in the cold, with the door slammed shut in my face, I realized that no matter how much I had given, it would never be enough. The life I had known was slipping away, and no amount of explaining or justifying would change the cold reality of it. My own son had cast me aside, and his wife, with her sharp words and demanding attitude, had shown me just how little I truly mattered to them. As I stood outside in the freezing cold, my breath visible in the air, the reality of the situation hit me with full force. I had always thought that family was everything. I had always believed that, no matter what, my children would care for me, would appreciate the sacrifices I had made for them. But that night, as I stood there with my bare feet on the cold concrete and my heart breaking, I realized just how wrong I had been. The wind cut through me like a blade, and my mind raced. I couldn't understand how this had happened. I had raised Jack, given him everything I had, sacrificed my own happiness to make sure he had the best life possible. And yet here I was, thrown out of his home, standing alone in the cold night, without even a pair of shoes to keep my feet warm. Anna had made sure of that, dragging me out of the house with such force that I had lost one of my shoes in the process. I stood there, gripping the door frame with everything I had, refusing to let go. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to be thrown out like this. not after all the years I had given to them. The silence that followed was deafening. Jack, my own son, didn't say a word. He just watched me. His eyes were cold, distant, as if I were nothing more than a stranger to him. I begged him to say something, anything, but all I received was the chilling sound of the door slamming shut. It felt like the final nail in the coffin of everything I had ever hoped for. How had things come to this? How had the love I had given been repaid with such coldness? I stumbled away from the door, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The night was silent, save for the occasional car passing by, but none of the drivers noticed the woman standing on the curb, shivering in the night. My heart ached as I realized that no one cared, no one but me. The thought of walking away, leaving that house behind, seemed impossible. Where would I go? How could I leave the only home I had known for so long? But I had no choice. I couldn't stand there forever, begging for a second chance that would never come. I was a mother who had given everything, and in return, I had been abandoned. No words of comfort, no understanding, just the coldness of a son who had turned his back on me, and the cruelty of a daughter-in-law who seemed to despise me with every fiber of her being. As I walked away, I felt a pang of loss deeper than anything I had ever known. But beneath that pain, something else began to stir within me, something I hadn't felt in years. It was a spark, a glimmer of determination. I might have been cast aside, but I was still here. I was still alive. And somehow, I knew that I couldn't let this be the end of my story. The world was vast, and I was still capable of finding my place in it. The following day, I found myself in an unfamiliar and uncomfortable place. I had spent the night in a small, run-down motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the smell of stale cigarette smoke lingered in the hallways, and the flickering neon light outside never seemed to turn off. It was the kind of place you never expected to be, especially not on your 63rd birthday. Yet here I was, sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to wrap my mind around everything that had happened the night before. The door to my son's house had slammed shut behind me, and I had been left standing outside in the cold. I had clung to the door frame with everything I had, my fingers frozen, my heart breaking, but in the end, nothing mattered. No one came to my rescue. My son, Jack, had watched from the sidelines, silent, indifferent. His wife, Anna, had been the one to push me out. I had never imagined it would come to this, but there I was, alone, abandoned by the people I had spent my life nurturing and caring for. As I sat there, my mind drifted back to the years I had spent raising my children. I thought about how much I had given up for them, the long hours, the sacrifices, the endless work to ensure that they had everything they needed. And now, it felt like all of that had been for nothing. Jack, my own flesh and blood, hadn't even tried to stand up for me. He had just let Anna take control, let her make the decisions, let her throw me out without a second thought. I felt like I had been discarded, like I was nothing more than an inconvenience to them. I had spent so much of my life taking care of others, making sure my children were well fed, well loved, and well cared for. But now, in my time of need, no one seemed to care about me. Not Jack, not Anna, and certainly not anyone else in the family. It hurt more than I could put into words. How could they just forget everything I had done for them? How could they turn their backs on me so easily that night? As I sat in the motel room, I felt a deep sense of loss. Not just for the family I had hoped to be part of, but for myself. I had given everything to them, and now I had nothing left. I didn't know where to go, what to do, or even how to pick myself up from this. But the next morning, something inside me shifted. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy, but I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I had spent my whole life giving to others, but I had never stopped to ask myself what I needed, what I wanted, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to start asking those questions. As I left the motel, I could feel a sense of determination starting to rise within me. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't go back to that life living in fear, living in silence, constantly sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of others. I had done enough of that. I deserved more. I deserved a life where I didn't have to tiptoe around the whims of others, a life where I could finally put myself first. The world was big, and I was still capable of finding my place in it. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever was. And as I stepped into the unfamiliar streets, I made a silent promise to myself I would find my way, no matter what. I had to. For me, the following weeks were a blur of emotions, grief, anger, confusion, but most of all, a quiet determination that I had never felt before. It was the strange feeling of being stripped bare, of being left alone to face the consequences of a life that had been lived for others. But in the midst of all that pain, there was also something else, a flicker of clarity that had been buried beneath years of sacrifice and selflessness. I had always thought of myself as a mother, a caregiver, someone whose purpose in life was to support her children and make their lives better. For so many years, I had put my family above all else, never once stopping to ask what I needed or what I wanted. Every decision I made, every choice I took, had been for them, my children, my family. I had given them everything. But now, standing alone in a world that suddenly felt so vast, I realized that I had forgotten one crucial thing myself. It was strange. This feeling of having nothing but the clothes on my back, yet somehow I felt more free than I had in years. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't tethered to the expectations of others. I wasn't weighed down by the constant need to please, to do everything right, to be everything to everyone. In a way, I felt like I had been given a second chance, a chance to live for me, but it was terrifying. How does one start again after decades of living for others? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't have to start from scratch. I had something I could hold onto, a small spark that had always been a part of me, buried beneath years of silence and subservience. It was the love I had for cooking, the joy I felt in creating meals, in nourishing people, in sharing something meaningful through food. For years, I had cooked for my family, not just out of necessity, but out of love. And now, that love could be mine again. It was a part of me that no one could take away. As I sat in the quiet of my small motel room, a sense of peace began to settle in. I no longer had to fight for a place at the table. I no longer had to justify my existence to anyone. I could do what I loved, in my own time, on my own terms. For the first time in ages, I allowed myself to think about what would make me happy. And it wasn't about riches or grand gestures. It wasn't about being seen or recognized. It was about finding my own rhythm, my own voice, after so many years of silence. I knew that I couldn't just keep wandering aimlessly. I needed a purpose, something to focus on, and it came to me in a way I hadn't expected, a chance to share what I loved with others. My passion for cooking could become something more. It could become a bridge, a way to connect with others who might need what I had to offer. It wasn't just about feeding people. It was about nurturing a community, sharing warmth and love through something as simple as a meal. I started small, creating videos of the recipes I had always made for my family. Simple, comforting meals that were affordable and nourishing. I didn't expect anything to come of it, but soon, something incredible happened. People started to watch. People started to listen. The messages came in, the comments from strangers who told me how much they appreciated the meals I shared, how they felt like they had found something they had been missing. It wasn't just food they were looking for. It was connection, and I could give that. It felt like a gift, one that I had kept hidden for so long. It wasn't long before I started receiving offers to help others, to teach cooking, to create meals for those who needed them. And then, an unexpected call came, an offer to become the kitchen supervisor at the local school. The school had heard about my cooking, about the videos I had posted, and they wanted me to bring my skills to their students. It wasn't the kind of recognition I had ever expected, but it was the kind that mattered. It was a chance to give back, to make a difference in a way that was meaningful to me. I had no idea where this journey would take me, but I knew one thing for sure: it was mine to control. I wasn't just Linda, the mother, or Linda, the caretaker. I was Linda, the woman who had something to offer the world. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a future to look forward to. As the weeks passed, I began to realize something important despite all the pain, the humiliation, and the sense of loss that had consumed me after that night. There was a strange sense of empowerment growing within me. I had spent so much of my life giving everything to my family, hoping that my sacrifices would mean something, that they would eventually appreciate everything I had done. But now, as I stood on my own, I realized that I didn't need their approval to be happy. I had spent so many years adjusting to their needs, putting their desires above my own, that I had forgotten who I was, what I needed, what I wanted, and now, for the first time in years, I was forced to face myself. The pain of being rejected by my son, of being discarded by people I had given everything to, didn't go away easily. It stayed with me, haunting my every step. I had never imagined that one day my own flesh and blood would turn their backs on me. My son, Jack, the child I had nurtured from birth, had watched in silence as his wife, Anna, pushed me out the door. It was a moment that still felt surreal, a betrayal that I couldn't seem to shake off. But there was something else buried beneath that hurt, something I hadn't expected to find: a quiet, unwavering resolve. For years, I had been the one who cleaned up the messes, the one who made sure everyone had what they needed, the one who sacrificed her own happiness for the sake of others. But when I was left standing alone in the cold, shivering and empty-handed, I realized that I had never taken the time to ask myself what I needed. I had lived for everyone else, but never for myself. And now, as I walked away from the house that once felt like home, I felt a shift inside me, a change that was subtle but undeniable. For the first time, I wasn't looking for anyone's validation. I wasn't waiting for someone to tell me that I mattered. I knew now that I had to matter to myself. I found comfort in small things. I began to take walks, to breathe in the crisp air, to rediscover the world outside the walls of my home. I allowed myself the space to feel, to grieve, and to heal. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the weight of what had happened was almost too much to bear. But with every step, I felt myself growing stronger. I had spent so long trying to be what everyone else wanted me to be, that I had forgotten who I was. And now, it was time to find that woman again. One day, as I was walking through town, I came across an old friend, Martha. She had always been there, a familiar face from my past. She had heard about what happened and offered a kind word, but it was more than that. She understood me in a way that no one else did. Martha had always been someone who believed in standing up for herself, and for the first time in years, I found myself listening to her. She encouraged me to stop living for others and to start living for myself. She reminded me that I had a voice, that I had dreams, and that it was time to pursue them. Martha's encouragement gave me the courage to take a leap. I began filming cooking videos, something I had always enjoyed but never had the time to focus on. I had always loved sharing my meals with others, but now I was sharing them with a wider audience. To my surprise, people started watching. They appreciated the simplicity and warmth of the meals I created. It wasn't about fancy dishes or elaborate recipes. It was about real food. Food that nourished not just the body, but the soul. The more I cooked, the more I realized that I had something to offer. I had spent so many years feeling invisible, like my worth was tied to what I could give to others. But now, I was starting to see that my worth wasn't defined by anyone else. It was defined by me. The videos I shared became more than just a hobby. They became a way to reconnect with myself and to find a new sense of purpose. I didn't know where this journey would take me, but I knew I was on the right path. I wasn't just a mother or a grandmother anymore. I was Linda, the woman who had rediscovered her voice, her passion, and her purpose. For the first time in my life, I was living for me, and it felt good. It felt like freedom. In the days that followed, the reality of what had happened settled in like a cold, heavy weight. I had spent so many years living for my family, making sure they had everything they needed, giving up pieces of myself to ensure their happiness. And now I was alone, sitting in a dingy motel room, wondering how I had ended up here abandoned, unwanted, forgotten. The humiliation of being thrown out of my own son's house, on my birthday no less, weighed heavily on me. It wasn't just the coldness of the night air that I could feel seeping into my bones. It was the coldness in the eyes of my son, Jack, as he stood silently by, watching as his wife, Anna, kicked me out without a second thought. I had hoped that, at the very least, Jack would speak up, would say something to stop this madness, but he didn't. He just let it happen. It was as though I was nothing more than an inconvenience to him, an inconvenience that could be discarded at will. As the door slammed shut behind me, I felt a sense of finality, like my years of sacrifice and love had meant nothing. I had worked tirelessly for my family, putting aside my own needs and desires. I had given my time, my energy, and even my heart to make sure they had everything they needed, and yet it felt like I had received nothing in return. No love, no gratitude, only silence and indifference. I had always believed that family would be there for you, no matter what. I had lived my life believing that, as a mother, I was the cornerstone of our family. But that belief was shattered in an instant. I had given everything to my son and his family, and now I had nothing. The painful truth was that, in their eyes, I was just an obstacle, someone to be dealt with and dismissed when I no longer fit into their picture-perfect lives. I couldn't help but think of all the sacrifices I had made over the years. I had put my own dreams on hold, my own happiness second. because I believed that was what being a mother meant. I had put my children first, always. But where had it gotten me? Nowhere. My son, Jack, was living his life, and his wife, Anna, had everything she wanted. And where was I, standing alone, with nothing but the cold night and the sound of the wind cutting through the empty streets? But there was a moment, standing there in the cold, that I began to realize something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I could finally take control of my life. Maybe I didn't have to be the one who always gave, always sacrificed, always put others first. Maybe it was time to put myself first for once. With that thought, I began to walk away from the house, away from the life I had known for so long. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't continue to be the person I had been, the one who had been willing to let herself be trampled over for the sake of others. I wasn't that person anymore. I found a sense of peace in that realization, a calmness that I hadn't felt in years. It was as if I had been holding my breath for so long, trying to be what everyone wanted me to be, that I had forgotten how to breathe on my own. But now, I was breathing again, and it felt good. As I walked down the street, the weight of everything that had happened still heavy in my chest, I knew one thing for sure: I was done. Done trying to please everyone, done sacrificing my own happiness, done living a life that wasn't truly mine. It was time for me to find my own path. It was time for me to find out who I really was, outside of the roles I had played for so many years. And I would. I had no idea where this journey would take me, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was free to choose. The days after I was thrown out of my son's house passed in a haze of confusion and sorrow. I had never imagined my life would come to this, standing outside in the cold, abandoned by my own flesh and blood. But as the shock began to wear off, something inside me shifted. I had spent so many years living for everyone else, caring for my children, putting their needs above my own, sacrificing my own dreams for their comfort. But now, for the first time in a long time, I was forced to face the reality that I had lost myself in the process. As I sat on the edge of that crummy motel bed, the smell of stale air and the flickering lights reminding me of how far I had fallen, I couldn't help but replay the events of the past days over and over in my mind. The way my son, Jack, had stood by, saying nothing as his wife, Anna, pushed me out. It was as if I was invisible to them, my years of sacrifice, my love for them, counted for nothing. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel the hurt of it. But amidst that pain, there was something else, a deep, aching realization that perhaps it was time to stop living for others. The world outside felt so empty, the streets quiet, except for the occasional car passing by, headlights slicing through the darkness. I didn't know where to go or what to do next, but I knew I couldn't go back to the life I had known. I had been a mother, a wife, a caretaker, but now I was none of those things. The roles I had played for so many years felt like a distant memory, and I was left to figure out who I was beyond them. It was in those quiet, lonely moments that I realized how much of myself I had sacrificed over the years. I had been everything to everyone, my children's constant caregiver, my husband's support, always the one to give, to care, to make sure everyone was happy. But I had never asked myself what made me happy. I had never taken the time to consider my own needs. And now, as I sat there alone, I had no choice but to start over, to reclaim a part of myself that I had lost somewhere along the way. I thought back to the small joys I had once had, the little things that brought me happiness. Cooking, for example. It had always been a passion of mine. Cooking for my family, creating meals from scratch, had always been something I loved. But over the years, I had put that passion on the back burner, focusing instead on what everyone else wanted or needed. But now, I could see it clearly. Cooking wasn't just a way to provide for my family. It was something that brought me joy, something that connected me to myself in a way nothing else could. It was then that I decided to take a small step forward. I began filming cooking videos, something I had always wanted to do, but never had the time for. I had no expectations, just a desire to create something for myself, something that brought me joy. To my surprise, people began watching. They appreciated my simple, home-cooked meals, the warmth and love I poured into every dish. It wasn't about perfection. It was about connection, about sharing something real with others. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had found a part of myself again. As the days turned into weeks, the videos I posted began to take on a life of their own. Messages poured in from people who were touched by my cooking, who found comfort in the meals I shared. The world suddenly felt a little less empty. I wasn't just Linda, the mother, the caretaker, the one who always gave. I was Linda, the woman who had something to offer, something of her own to give. It was a new beginning, and it felt both frightening and exhilarating. One day, an unexpected phone call came. It was from the principal of the local elementary school. He had heard about my cooking videos and wanted to know if I would consider coming in to work with the school to help improve the quality of the meals they served to the children. At first, I couldn't believe it. Me working at the school. But then I realized that it was the perfect opportunity to use my love for cooking in a way that would make a difference in the lives of others. It was a chance to do something meaningful, something I could be proud of. And so, I took the leap. I began working at the school, preparing meals for the children, using the skills I had honed over the years. It wasn't just about cooking. It was about nourishing these kids, giving them the care and attention they deserved. It was a way for me to finally give back, not just to my family, but to a community that needed what I had to offer. The work wasn't always easy, but it was fulfilling in a way I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living for others. I was living for myself, and it felt incredible. As I stood in the school kitchen, preparing meals for the children, I felt a deep sense of pride. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was Linda, the woman who had found her own path, her own purpose, and her own happiness. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what had happened in the past, I was finally free. In the weeks that followed, something began to change inside me. The initial shock of being thrown out of my own son's house, of standing alone in the cold, without even a pair of shoes to keep my feet warm, had given way to a quiet realization. As the sting of betrayal began to dull, I understood something I had never fully allowed myself to see before for so many years. I had been living my life for others. I had poured my heart and soul into my children, into my family, and in the process, I had lost myself. It was as if I had become invisible, no longer a person with my own desires and dreams, but merely a figure who existed to serve the needs of others. As I sat alone in that rundown motel, the weight of everything that had happened pressed heavily on my chest. But amid the pain and confusion, there was also a small spark of something else, a recognition that maybe I had reached a turning point in my life. I had spent so many years putting my family first, sacrificing my own happiness, my own well-being, and my own needs for the sake of their comfort. And now, as I stood alone in the wake of their indifference, I realized that I had neglected one important person myself. I thought about my son, Jack. He had always been my baby, my pride and joy, the one I had nurtured and loved unconditionally. I had done everything for him, from helping him with his homework to ensuring he had the best opportunities in life. Yet, in the moment that mattered most, when I needed him the most, he had stood by in silence. The anger that I felt toward him was intense, but so was the sadness. How had I gotten here? How had the bond we once shared been broken so easily? But, despite everything, a new sense of resolve began to grow within me. I couldn't allow myself to remain stuck in this place of hurt and despair. I had spent so much time worrying about what everyone else wanted, about making sure they were happy, that I had forgotten how to live for myself. It was time to change that. It was time to start putting myself first. I decided to take a step, no matter how small, toward reclaiming my sense of self. I had always loved cooking, and it had been a source of comfort and joy for me in the past. For years, I had cooked for my family, pouring love and care into every meal, but I had never allowed myself to truly appreciate it, to see it as something more than just a task. Now, it felt like my chance to reconnect with something that had always been a part of me. I began recording simple cooking videos, sharing the recipes I had loved to make for my family. They weren't anything extravagant, just simple, home-cooked meals that brought me comfort. And to my surprise, people started watching. They began to appreciate the warmth in the meals, the simplicity, and the love that went into each one. For the first time in years, I felt seen not just as a mother, a wife, or a caregiver, but as myself. The more I cooked and shared, the more I realized that I had something valuable to offer. It wasn't just about cooking. It was about connection, about creating something real and meaningful. And for the first time in so long, I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I was doing it for me. As my following grew, I was approached by a local school to help improve their meal program. It was a job that I never could have imagined, but it felt right. It felt like a way for me to make a difference, to use my passion for cooking in a meaningful way. It was an opportunity to give back, to share my skills with a new generation, and to finally feel like I had purpose again. In that moment, I knew that this was just the beginning. I wasn't just the woman who had been thrown out, the woman who had been cast aside. I was Linda, the woman who had found her voice again, who had found her passion, and who was finally living for herself. And as I walked into that new chapter of my life, I felt a sense of freedom and hope that I hadn't known in years. The future, though uncertain, now seemed full of possibilities. In the days that followed, the silence was the hardest part to bear. It was strange how absence could fill a room so completely, how the emptiness of a phone that didn't ring or a door that didn't open could seem louder than any argument or confrontation. I had been thrown out of my son's house, discarded by the very people I had given everything to. Yet, despite the heartache and the sense of betrayal that weighed heavily on me, I was beginning to realize something that I had long overlooked. I had spent my entire life worrying about everyone else's happiness, and I had forgotten to ask myself what I truly wanted. After the humiliation of that night, I found myself grappling with a new reality. My son, Jack, and his wife, Anna, had made it clear that I no longer had a place in their home. The door had slammed in my face, and there had been no apology, no attempt at understanding. It was as if I had ceased to matter. I had spent so many years doing everything for them, sacrificing my own needs, setting aside my own desires, all for the sake of their comfort. But now, standing alone in the cold, I was forced to confront the painful truth. All those years of giving had left me with nothing. I had always believed that family was the one thing that would never let you down, the one thing that could always be relied on. I thought that no matter what, the bond between a mother and her children was unbreakable. But in that moment, as I stood outside my son's house, I realized just how fragile those bonds could be. There was no safety net. There was no guarantee that the love I had given would be returned when I needed it most. But in the silence that followed, as I sat alone in a cheap motel room, something inside me began to shift. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy, but I began to realize that I didn't have to stay in this place of hurt and hopelessness. I had spent my entire life being everything to everyone else, always the caretaker, always the one who gave, who loved, who sacrificed. But now, for the first time in my life, I had the chance to live for myself. I began to reflect on the things that had brought me joy, the things that had always made me feel alive, even in the quietest moments. Cooking was one of those things. I had always loved cooking, and it had always been a way for me to connect with my family, to share something meaningful with them. But over the years, it had become just another task, another thing to do for others. Now, with no one to cook for, I realized how much I missed it, how much it had been a part of who I was. I decided to take a step, however small, to reclaim that part of myself. I began recording simple cooking videos, something I had always wanted to do, but never had the time or space for. I shared recipes that were close to my heart, meals that I had always cooked for my family, meals that brought me comfort. To my surprise, people began to watch. They began to appreciate the warmth in my cooking, the love that went into each meal. It wasn't about perfection. It was about connection, about creating something real and heartfelt. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. As I continued to share my love of cooking, the more I realized that this wasn't just a way to pass the time. It was a way to find my purpose again. It was a way to reclaim something that I had given up long ago. The more I shared, the more I received, not just in the form of praise, but in the form of gratitude from people who found comfort in what I offered. It wasn't just about food. It was about creating something that could bring people together, that could remind them of home, of love, of belonging. One day, an unexpected phone call came, a call from a local school principal who had heard about my cooking videos. He asked if I would be willing to come in and help improve the school's meal program. At first, I didn't believe it, me working at a school. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt right. It felt like the perfect way to use my passion for cooking in a way that could make a difference in the lives of others. It wasn't just about cooking meals. It was about nourishing these children, giving them the care and attention they deserved. I accepted the offer, and it wasn't long before I found myself in the school kitchen, preparing meals for the students. It felt incredible. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I wasn't cooking to meet the needs of my family, to satisfy their expectations. I was doing it for myself, for the joy it brought me, and for the children I was helping. It wasn't just a job. It was a way to share something meaningful, something I had always wanted to give back. And as I stood there, cooking for the kids, I realized something profound. I wasn't just Linda, the mother, the grandmother, the one who had always given. I was Linda, the woman who had found herself again, the woman who had found the strength to live for herself, to embrace the things that brought her joy, to start over. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when the pain of the past crept back in. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace, a sense of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to walk, and that, I realized, was enough. The following months were a quiet but steady transformation. The initial shock of being thrown out of my son's house, the sting of betrayal, still lingered. But as the days turned into weeks, I found myself starting to rebuild not just my life, but my sense of self. The coldness of that night, the way I was cast aside by my own family, had shattered something inside me. But in the brokenness, I began to find pieces of myself I had long forgotten. I spent the first few weeks in a haze of confusion, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. My son, Jack, the one person I had given so much of myself to, had abandoned me without a second thought. His wife, Anna, had pushed me out as if I were nothing more than a nuisance. And Jack had stood by, silent, indifferent. The door slammed shut behind me, and I was left standing on the cold step, my heart heavy with sorrow and betrayal. For the first time in my life, I had to face the painful reality that my sacrifices, my love, had meant nothing to them. I had given everything, and yet it felt like I had been invisible, like I was no longer part of their world. I had always believed that family was the one thing you could count on, that no matter what, your children would love and care for you. I had always been there for Jack, always put his needs first, always made sure he had everything he needed. But now, standing outside in the cold, I realized that all my years of giving had been in vain. No one came to help me. No one reached out with a comforting word. My son, the child I had nurtured and cared for, was gone. And in that moment, I felt a deep emptiness, a loss that I couldn't quite put into words. But as I sat in the small motel room, the reality of it all began to sink in. I had spent so much of my life living for others, sacrificing my own happiness, my own needs, for the sake of my family. I had always put their happiness before mine. But now, as I sat alone in that room, I realized that it was time for a change. I couldn't keep living for others. I needed to live for myself. The first step was small. I began to cook again, not for anyone else, but for me. I had always loved cooking. It was something that had brought me joy, something that connected me to myself. But over the years, it had become just another task, something I did for my family, not for my own enjoyment. Now, with no one to cook for, I realized how much I missed it. I began to experiment with recipes, rediscovering the joy that cooking once brought me. I even started filming cooking videos, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. It was a way to reconnect with a part of myself that I had lost over the years. To my surprise, people began to watch. They appreciated my simple, home-cooked meals, and the feedback I received was more than I had ever expected. It wasn't about perfection or fancy dishes. It was about sharing something real, something that came from the heart. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I wasn't just a mother or a grandmother or a wife. I was Linda, the woman who loved to cook, the woman who had something to share with the world. As my following grew, I began to realize that I had found something meaningful. It wasn't just about cooking or making videos. It was about finding my voice again, about rediscovering my own worth. I wasn't just doing something for others anymore. I was doing something for myself. It was liberating. And then, just as I was beginning to find my footing, an unexpected opportunity came my way. A local school had heard about my cooking videos and asked if I would be interested in coming in to help improve their meal program. At first, I didn't believe it. Me working at a school. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt right. It wasn't just about cooking. It was about making a difference, about sharing my love for food with others in a way that could truly impact their lives. I took the job, and as I began working at the school, preparing meals for the children, I realized that this was my chance to give back, not just to my family, but to the community that had supported me. It wasn't easy at first, but it felt so rewarding. I was using my passion to help others, and in the process, I was helping myself heal. In the end, that moment of betrayal, that painful night when I was cast out, had led me to something I never could have imagined. It was a new beginning. It was my opportunity to find myself again, to live for myself, and to embrace the things that had always brought me joy. And now, as I stood in the school kitchen, preparing meals for the children, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was doing something that was truly mine, something that made me feel alive, something that allowed me to live with purpose and meaning. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had found my way, and that, in itself, was enough. As time went on, I found a sense of calm in the quiet moments, in the spaces where I could reflect on my life. The events that had shaken me, being thrown out by my own son, rejected by the people I had loved and cared for so deeply, taught me a powerful lesson about the importance of self-worth. I had spent my entire life trying to please others, giving everything I had without ever asking for anything in return. But in the end, it became clear no one can truly value you until you first value yourself. That harsh realization led me to reclaim my life. I began to focus on the things that brought me joy, things I had ignored for years. I rekindled my passion for cooking, and in doing so, I found my purpose again. It wasn't about perfection. It was about doing something for me, for my own well-being. And in that process, I discovered strength I never knew I had. So, I urge you today, take the time to find your own worth. Don't wait for others to see it. You are enough just as you are. Don't let anyone's indifference define your value. If you're struggling, remember that it's okay to put yourself first sometimes. It's not selfish, it's necessary. If you've ever felt lost, abandoned, or overlooked, I want you to know that you can rise again. Life isn't about how many times you fall, it's about how many times you get back up. If you found meaning in this story, share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of strength, resilience, and self-discovery. Let's continue this journey together.